Segment 1. The foundation of fast learning. Let's begin with a simple truth that might change how you think about learning. For so long, many of us have believed that some people are just naturally fast learners, that it's a gift you're born with, something in your DNA that either sparkles brightly or doesn't. But here's what the research actually shows, and it's much more encouraging than that old belief. Learning quickly isn't about having some special talent that others lack. It's not about being the smartest person in the room or having a photographic memory. It's about something far more accessible to all of us. Learning fast is about efficiency, not shortcuts. When we watch someone pick up a new skill seemingly overnight, we might think they've found some secret trick or hack that we're missing. But the reality is much simpler and more honest than that. Fast learners aren't cutting corners. They are simply being more efficient with their time and attention. They are asking better questions. They are practicing the right things in the right order. They are not wasting energy on the parts that don't matter. Efficiency means doing what works, when it works, and recognizing what doesn't serve your progress. It's about clarity of purpose, not speed for speed's sake. And here's the beautiful part. Efficiency can be learned. It can be practiced. It can become your natural way of approaching anything new. Active learning changes the brain more than passive consumption. Think about the difference between watching someone cook a meal and actually cooking it yourself. When you watch, you might learn something. You might pick up a tip or two. But when you're standing at the stove, feeling the heat, adjusting the seasoning, making mistakes and correcting them in real time, that's when your brain truly rewires itself. Passive consumption, like reading or watching videos, has its place. But the brain transforms most dramatically when you engage actively. When you write, when you practice, when you experiment and fail and try again. Your neurons fire differently. New pathways form. The learning doesn't just sit on the surface. It integrates deep within you. Doing is faster than consuming. This builds naturally on what we just explored. We live in an age of endless information. You can watch 1,000 tutorials on playing guitar, read 100 articles on public speaking, consume course after course on any topic you can imagine. And yet, 10 minutes of actually doing, of putting your fingers on the strings, of standing up and speaking out loud, of writing that first messy paragraph, that 10 minutes will teach you more than hours of passive learning. Doing forces you to confront what you don't know. It reveals the gaps immediately. And in facing those gaps, you learn faster than you ever could by simply absorbing more information. The doing is where the learning lives. Intense focus beats long hours. You've probably heard people say they studied for 8 hours or practiced all weekend. But here's what matters more than time. It's the quality of attention you bring to those minutes. 30 minutes of deep, undistracted focus where you're fully present and engaged will take you further than 3 hours of distracted, scattered effort. When your attention is fractured, when you're checking your phone or letting your mind wander, you're not really learning. You're going through the motions. But when you eliminate distractions, when you bring your full self to the task, even briefly, that's when the magic happens. Your brain operates at a different level. It makes connections faster. It retains information more deeply. Intensity of focus is the secret ingredient that separates rapid learners from everyone else. Learning speed compounds from small advantages. Imagine 2 people learning the same skill. One person is just 5% more efficient in how they practice. 5%. That's barely noticeable day to day. But over weeks and months, that tiny advantage compounds. The person who's slightly more efficient learns a little faster, which gives them confidence, which makes them practice more, which makes them learn even faster still. It's a beautiful upward spiral. And here's the encouraging part. You don't need massive advantages. You don't need to be twice as smart or work twice as hard. Small improvements, stacked consistently, create remarkable results over time. A little more focus today. A slightly better question tomorrow. These small edges multiply into something extraordinary. Strong long-term reasons, your deep why, speed adaptation. When you're learning something because you genuinely care about it, because it connects to something meaningful in your life, your brain operates differently. You're not forcing yourself through the motions. You're pulled forward by purpose. Think about a parent learning a new language because they want to communicate with their child's grandparents. Or someone learning to code because they want to build something that solves a problem they care deeply about. That emotional connection, that clear sense of why this matters, it removes resistance. It makes the hard parts feel worthwhile. Your motivation doesn't run dry after a few days. And when you hit obstacles, your why carries you through. Learning becomes not just faster, but sustainable. Emotions and curiosity boost learning. There's a reason you remember where you were during significant emotional moments, but you've forgotten most of what you memorized for tests in school. Emotion creates stickiness in the brain. When you're curious about something, when you're excited or even a little frustrated, when you feel something, your brain pays attention differently. It releases chemicals that strengthen memory formation. It creates deeper neural pathways. This is why the best teachers don't just deliver information. They spark curiosity. They create emotional engagement. And you can do this for yourself. Find the parts of what you're learning that genuinely interest you. Notice what makes you curious. Follow those threads. Let yourself feel the satisfaction of small discoveries. Your emotions aren't obstacles to learning. They are accelerants. Stories and emotion make skills stick. Here's why this matters. When you learn a dry fact, a formula, a rule, your brain files it away in one compartment. But when you learn something wrapped in a story, connected to emotion, tied to a real example, your brain stores it in multiple places. You remember the story. You remember how it made you feel. You remember the context. And all of those become triggers that help you recall the information later. This is why you can forget someone's name 2 seconds after meeting them, but you remember elaborate stories from years ago. Our brains evolved for story, not for abstract information. So when you're learning, create stories. Connect new information to experiences. Make it personal. Make it emotional. The skills and knowledge will stick in ways that mere repetition never could. And with that, we complete our first foundation, 8 insights into how learning actually works. Not the myths we've been told, but the real mechanisms that make fast learning possible. Rest easy knowing that these principles are available to you, ready to be applied whenever you choose. Let them settle gently in your mind as we move forward together. Segment 2. Choosing your target. Before we can move faster, we need to know where we're going. It sounds simple, almost obvious, but this is where so many learning journeys quietly fall apart. Not from lack of effort, not from lack of time, but from lack of clarity, from aiming at everything and hitting nothing. So let's talk about the art of choosing your target well. Focus on one clear skill. There's a certain romance to being a Renaissance person, to learning 5 things at once, to juggling multiple projects and interests simultaneously. And perhaps there's a time and place for exploration. But when you want to actually get good at something, when you want to learn fast and learn deep, the path is narrow and focused. One clear skill. Not get better at music, but learn to play 3 songs on the piano. Not improve my writing, but master writing compelling opening paragraphs. When you focus, all your mental energy flows in one direction. You're not scattering your attention across multiple domains. You're building momentum in a single area, and that momentum carries you forward faster than you'd believe possible. Choose one thing. Get clear on what that one thing actually is. Everything else can wait. Set a specific outcome and deadline. Dreams are beautiful, but they are shapeless. I want to learn Spanish is a dream. I want to hold a 15-minute conversation with a native speaker about daily life by March 1st is a goal. Do you feel the difference? One drifts in the realm of someday. The other plants a flag in reality. When you set a specific outcome, your brain knows what success looks like. When you add a deadline, you create useful pressure. Not the panicked, desperate kind, but the focusing kind. The kind that helps you say no to distractions because you know exactly what you're working toward and when you need to get there. Vague intentions create vague results. Specific outcomes with clear deadlines create action, focus, and measurable progress. Clear goals speed up practice. Here's what happens when your goal is fuzzy. You sit down to practice and you wonder, what should I work on? You waste mental energy deciding. You second-guess yourself. You try a little of this and a little of that, never quite sure if you're spending your time wisely. But when your goal is crystal clear, practice becomes obvious. You know exactly what to work on because you know exactly where you're trying to go. Every practice session has direction. You can measure your progress. You can see the gap between where you are and where you're heading, and that gap tells you precisely what to focus on next. Clear goals eliminate the friction of uncertainty. They turn practice from a wandering exploration into a direct path. Use micro-goals inside sessions. Even within a single practice session, clarity compounds. Let's say you're learning to draw portraits. Sitting down with the vague intention to practice drawing will lead to an unfocused hour. But what if you set a micro-goal? In the next 20 minutes, I'll practice drawing eyes from 3 different angles. Suddenly you have a finish line. You have something concrete to accomplish. And here's what's beautiful about this. When you hit that micro goal, you get a small hit of satisfaction. A sense of completion. That feeling motivates the next micro goal. You're not trying to climb the entire mountain in one session. You're taking deliberate steps, celebrating each one, building momentum as you go. Micro-goals transform overwhelming tasks into manageable victories. Use a single daily focus priority. Every day offers more opportunities than you can possibly take. More things you could learn, more skills you could practice, more information you could consume. If you try to do it all, you'll spread yourself impossibly thin. But what if, each day, you chose one priority? One thing that matters most for your learning goal. Maybe today that's 30 minutes of deliberate practice. Maybe tomorrow it's watching an expert and taking notes. The specific priority might change, but the principle remains: one focus, executed well, beats 10 focuses executed poorly. When you wake up knowing your single most important learning task for the day, you protect it. You build your day around it. And day after day, that one priority stacks into remarkable progress. Align tasks to slightly above your current level. There's a zone where learning happens most efficiently. Too easy, and you're not growing, you're just repeating what you already know. Too hard, and you're overwhelmed, frustrated, unable to make sense of what you're attempting. But right at the edge of your current ability, just slightly beyond what's comfortable, that's where the magic lives. Psychologists call it the zone of proximal development. It's the sweet spot where challenge meets capability. When you align your practice tasks to this level, you're constantly stretching without breaking. You're uncomfortable enough to grow, but not so lost that you shut down. This requires honesty about where you actually are, not where you wish you were. And it requires adjusting as you improve, always keeping yourself in that productive zone of slight discomfort. Front-load fundamentals before advanced tricks. There's a temptation, especially when you're excited about learning something new, to jump straight to the impressive stuff. The guitar solo, the fancy technique, the advanced theory. But here's what master learners know: the flashy stuff is built on invisible foundations. And when you skip those foundations, you build on sand. Everything becomes harder than it needs to be. You develop bad habits that have to be unlearned later. But when you invest time early in the fundamentals, when you make sure your foundation is solid, everything else comes faster. The advanced techniques aren't mysterious anymore. They are natural extensions of basics you've mastered. It's not the exciting path at first, but it's the faster path in the long run. Front-load the fundamentals. Trust that the impressive stuff will come, and it'll come easier than you can imagine right now. Use tiny previews before big topics. When you're about to tackle something complex, something that feels overwhelming, there's a simple technique that makes it more manageable. Preview it first. Not a deep dive, just a quick overview. Skim the chapter before you read it carefully. Watch a 5-minute summary video before the hour-long tutorial. Look at the finished example before you start building your own. These tiny previews create a mental framework. They give your brain a map of the territory. And when you then dive into the detailed learning, your brain already has context. It knows where things fit. The information doesn't feel random. It slots into the structure you've already glimpsed. It's like looking at a picture on a puzzle box before you start assembling the pieces. You learn faster because you have a sense of the whole, even as you're working on the parts. And there we have it, 8 more insights. This time about the crucial work of choosing your target wisely. Because learning fast doesn't just happen. It happens when you aim with intention, when you know exactly where you're going and you've broken the path down into clear, manageable steps. Let these ideas rest in your mind. Let them shape how you think about your own learning journey. The right target makes all the difference. Segment 3. Building your learning engine. Now we arrive at something fascinating. We've talked about choosing the right target, about aiming with clarity and intention. But how does learning actually happen inside your brain? What's the machinery beneath the surface? Understanding this changes everything. Because when you know how your brain naturally works, you can work with it instead of against it. So let's explore the engine of learning itself. Break the skill into chunks. Imagine trying to memorize a phone number. If someone rattled off 10 digits in a row, 7, 2, 3, 9, 4, 8, 1, 6, 5, 0, it feels overwhelming. But when you chunk it, 723, pause, 948, pause, 1650, suddenly it's manageable. Your brain doesn't handle big, formless masses of information well, but it's remarkably good at handling smaller, organized pieces. This applies to every skill you'll ever learn. Playing a song on the piano. Break it into sections, maybe even individual measures. Learning a language. Break it into common phrases, then individual grammar patterns. Writing an essay. Break it into opening, supporting points, conclusion. When you chunk a skill, you transform something impossible into a series of possible steps. Each chunk is learnable. And when you master the chunks, they combine into the whole skill, seemingly effortless. Chunking aligns with brain limits. There's a reason chunking works so well, and it's rooted in how your brain is actually built. Back in the 1950s, a psychologist named George Miller discovered something remarkable about human memory. We can hold about 7 items in our working memory at once, give or take 2. Some people can hold 5 things, some can hold 9, but there's a limit. This isn't a flaw, it's just how we're designed. When you try to learn something that exceeds this limit, your brain struggles. Information spills out as fast as you're putting it in. But when you respect this limit, when you organize information into chunks that fit comfortably within your working memory, learning becomes natural. You're not fighting your own cognitive architecture. You're using it the way it was meant to be used. Smaller information chunks fit brain limits. Let's make this even more practical. When you're learning something new, and you feel that sense of overwhelm, that feeling of too much coming at you too fast, that's your signal. That's your brain telling you the chunks are too big. So you make them smaller. If you're learning a dance routine and 8 counts feels like too much, try 4 counts. If you're studying a concept and the whole chapter is overwhelming, try one section. Even one paragraph. There's no shame in making the chunks small. In fact, that's often the secret. Once you've mastered the small chunk, you can gradually make them bigger. Your working memory actually expands with practice as information becomes more familiar and compresses into single units. But you start small. You respect your limits. And paradoxically, by accepting these limits, you learn faster than if you'd tried to force your way through. Turn key steps into simple rules. Your brain loves rules. Not complicated, jargon-filled rules, but simple, clear, memorable ones. When you're learning a skill, there are usually a few key principles that matter most. If you can distill those principles into simple rules, you give your brain something to hang on to. Learning to take better photographs. Maybe your rule is light first, composition second, settings third. Learning to write clearly. Perhaps it's one idea per sentence, one theme per paragraph. These rules aren't meant to capture every nuance. They are meant to give you a reliable starting point, a framework you can apply quickly without having to think through everything from scratch each time. Simple rules reduce the mental effort required. They free up your working memory to focus on execution rather than decision-making. Reduce cognitive load with structure. Every time your brain has to figure something out from scratch, it uses energy. It creates cognitive load. And you only have so much mental energy to spend in a practice session. But when you add structure, you reduce that load dramatically. Structure means you're not reinventing the wheel every time. You have a process, a system, a way of approaching the task that's already proven. Maybe it's always warming up the same way before practice. Maybe it's following the same sequence of steps when you're solving a certain type of problem. That structure becomes automatic, almost invisible. And because you're not spending mental energy on the structure itself, you have more energy available for learning the actual skill. Structure isn't restriction. It's liberation. It frees your mind to focus on what matters most. Use templates, checklists, and routines. Here's where structure becomes tangible. Templates give you a starting point so you're not facing a blank page. Checklists ensure you don't forget important steps. Routines create consistency so your brain knows what to expect. Let's say you're learning to give presentations. You might create a template, opening story, 3 main points, closing call to action. Now you're not wondering how to structure your talk. You're focusing on the content itself. Or maybe you're learning to debug code. You create a checklist, read the error message, check the most recent changes, test each component individually. Now you have a reliable process instead of panicking when something breaks. These tools aren't crutches. They are amplifiers. They let you focus your limited cognitive resources on the parts of learning that actually require creativity and attention. Connect new skills to what you already know. Your brain is not a blank slate. It's a vast network of existing knowledge, experiences, and skills. And the fastest way to learn something new is to connect it to something you already understand. This is why metaphors are so powerful. Why good teachers say it's like this thing you already know, except. When you create these connections, you're not building new neural pathways from nothing. You're extending and modifying pathways that already exist. That's faster. That's more efficient. So when you're learning something new, actively look for similarities. How is this like something you've done before? What does this remind you of? Even if the connection isn't perfect, it gives your brain a foothold, a place to start. And from that starting point, the new learning builds much more quickly. Translate skills across domains. And here's where it gets really interesting. Skills are more transferable than you might think. The discipline you learned practicing a musical instrument transfers to learning a sport. The problem-solving you developed in math shows up when you're debugging code or troubleshooting a recipe. The communication skills you built writing essays help you in conversations and presentations. When you learn a new skill, you're not just learning that one specific thing. You're developing underlying capacities that apply broadly. Focus, patience, pattern recognition, self-correction, the ability to notice your mistakes and adjust. These meta skills travel with you across domains. So when you're learning something new, ask yourself, what have I already learned that's similar? How can I translate what I know from one area into this new area? You're not starting from zero. You never are. You're bringing a whole toolkit of transferable abilities, and recognizing that fact accelerates everything. And there we have our third foundation complete, 8 insights into how your brain actually builds skills, how learning happens at the level of neurons and working memory and cognitive structure. This is your learning engine. And now that you understand how it works, you can tune it, optimize it, and run it more efficiently than ever before. Let these principles settle. Let them become part of how you approach every new skill. The engine is there, ready to serve you. Segment 4. Practice that actually works. We've built the foundation. We've chosen our target. We understand how the brain learns. Now comes the heart of everything, the practice itself. Because here's the truth that separates those who improve from those who stay stuck. Not all practice is created equal. You can spend 1,000 hours doing something and barely improve, or you can spend 100 hours practicing the right way and transform completely. So let's talk about what actually works. Practice deliberately, not mindlessly. There's a kind of practice most people do. You show up. You go through the motions. Your mind wanders. You're physically present but mentally elsewhere. Maybe you're thinking about what's for dinner or replaying a conversation from earlier. This is mindless practice, and it produces mindless results. Then there's deliberate practice. You show up with intention. You know exactly what you're working on and why. You're fully present, paying attention to what's happening, noticing what works and what doesn't. You're constantly making small adjustments based on feedback. This kind of practice is harder. It's more mentally demanding. You can't do it for as long. But 20 minutes of deliberate practice will take you further than 2 hours of mindless repetition. The difference is attention. The difference is intention. The difference is whether you're truly engaged or just going through motions. Diagnose and target weak links. Here's what average learners do. They practice what they are already good at because it feels good to do things well. But master learners do something different. They hunt for their weak links. They find the specific parts they struggle with, and they target those parts relentlessly. If you're learning a song and one transition keeps tripping you up, that's where you focus. Not on the parts you can already play smoothly. If you're learning a language and your pronunciation of certain sounds is off, that's your practice target. This requires honesty. It requires being willing to confront what you're not good at yet. But this is where growth lives. In the gaps. In the weak links. When you strengthen those specific areas, everything else gets easier. Your overall skill level rises because you've eliminated the bottlenecks. Test yourself instead of rereading. Here's a common trap. You read something. You watch a tutorial. And then you think, I should review that again to make sure I remember it. So you reread. You rewatch. It feels productive. It feels like you're reinforcing the learning. But here's what research shows. Rereading is one of the least effective study methods there is. You know what works better. Testing yourself. Closing the book and trying to recall what you just learned. Attempting to apply the skill without looking at the instructions. It feels harder. It feels less comfortable. And that's exactly why it works. When you test yourself, you're forcing your brain to retrieve the information, and that act of retrieval strengthens the memory far more than passive review ever could. So make testing, not rereading, your default mode of practice. Struggle, What researchers call desirable difficulty actually helps memory. This might be the most counterintuitive insight in all of learning science. We tend to think that learning should feel smooth, easy, comfortable. When it feels hard, we assume something's wrong. But moderate struggle is precisely what makes learning stick. When your brain has to work to retrieve information, when you have to think hard to solve a problem, when you're slightly uncomfortable because you're being challenged, that's when the deepest learning happens. Your brain pays more attention during struggle. It forms stronger neural connections. The memories become more durable. Easy practice feels good in the moment, but it produces shallow learning. Difficult practice feels frustrating in the moment, but it produces deep, lasting mastery. Embrace the struggle. Welcome it as a sign that real learning is happening. Slight mistakes help learning. We've been taught to fear mistakes, to avoid them, to feel embarrassed when we make them. But here's what actually happens when you make a mistake during practice. Your brain pays attention. It notices the gap between what you intended and what actually happened. And in that noticing, learning occurs. If you never make mistakes, if everything is always too easy, your brain has no reason to adjust or improve. But when you're working right at the edge of your ability, making occasional mistakes and correcting them, that's optimal. Not constant failure, that's discouraging and unproductive. But slight mistakes, errors you can recognize and fix, these are golden opportunities. They show you exactly what needs work. So don't practice at a level where you never make mistakes. Practice at a level where you make some mistakes and then figure out how to fix them. Intentional error cycles build mastery. Here's an advanced technique that master learners use. They don't just wait for mistakes to happen naturally. Sometimes they create them intentionally. They try things slightly wrong on purpose, just to see what happens and understand the boundaries of correctness. A musician might deliberately play a passage with different timing to understand what makes the right timing work. A writer might intentionally write a sentence poorly to understand what makes a good sentence clear. This isn't about practicing mistakes, it's about understanding the space around the correct technique. When you explore the edges, when you understand what doesn't work and why, your understanding of what does work becomes much deeper and more flexible. You're not just following rules anymore. You truly understand the principles. Alternate fast and slow repetitions. When you're practicing a physical skill, whether it's a sport, an instrument, or even typing, there's magic in varying your speed. Slow practice lets you focus on technique, on getting every detail right, on building correct patterns into your muscle memory. You can pay attention to everything. But fast practice tests whether those patterns hold under pressure. It reveals where your technique breaks down. Neither speed alone is sufficient. If you only practice slowly, you never develop fluidity. If you only practice at full speed, you reinforce mistakes you're making too quickly to notice. But when you alternate, slow for precision, fast for integration, slow again to clean up what broke down, you develop both accuracy and speed. You build a skill that's both correct and automatic. Vary practice slightly to prevent plateaus. Your brain is an adaptation machine. But here's the thing about adaptation. Once you've adapted to something, you stop improving. You plateau. This is why doing the exact same practice routine day after day stops working after a while. Your brain has figured it out. There's no more challenge. So you introduce variation. Not so much that you're doing something completely different, but small changes that keep your brain adapting. Change the order of your practice drills. Adjust the tempo slightly. Practice in a different location. Use slightly different materials or tools. These small variations force your brain to stay flexible, to keep adjusting, to avoid settling into a rigid pattern. Variation prevents plateaus and keeps improvement continuous. Mix related subskills, a technique called interleaving. Here's how most people practice. They work on one thing until they've got it, then they move to the next thing. Master one subskill completely, then master the next one. It seems logical. But there's a more effective approach called interleaving. You practice multiple related subskills in the same session, mixing them together. If you're learning tennis, instead of hitting 100 forehands, then 100 backhands, you alternate forehand, backhand, forehand, serve, backhand. If you're studying math, instead of doing 20 problems of one type, you mix different types of problems together. This feels harder. It's less comfortable because you keep switching. But that switching forces your brain to continually discriminate between different skills, to recognize which one is needed when. And that discrimination, that active decision-making, produces deeper learning than blocked practice ever could. Learn in small, mixed blocks. This brings everything together into a practical approach. Instead of massive, marathon practice sessions focused on one thing, break your practice into smaller blocks and mix different elements together. Maybe you practice for 20 minutes, focusing on 3 different aspects of your skill, rotating through them. Then you take a break. Then another mixed block. This approach leverages everything we've discussed. It prevents mindless repetition. It builds in variation. It uses interleaving. It keeps you fresh enough to practice deliberately. Small, mixed blocks also make practice more sustainable. You're less likely to burn out. You're more likely to show up consistently. And consistency over time, even in small doses, beats occasional marathon sessions every time. And there we have it, 10 principles of practice that actually works. Not practice that just fills time or makes you feel busy, but practice that transforms your abilities, session by session, day by day. These aren't theories. These are tested principles that separate rapid learners from everyone else. Let them guide your practice. Let them reshape how you approach improvement. The path to mastery is clearer than it's ever been. Segment 5: Feedback, Reality, and Pressure. We've talked about how to practice. Now we need to talk about how you know if that practice is working. How you course correct. How you bridge the gap between the controlled environment of practice and the messy reality of actual use. This is where fast learners truly separate themselves from everyone else. Not in how hard they work, but in how well they see reality and how courageously they test themselves against it. Get fast, specific feedback. Imagine learning to shoot a basketball while blindfolded. You take a shot, but you never get to see if it went in. You'd never improve, no matter how many shots you took. This seems absurd, yet this is how many people practice. They do something, but they get no clear feedback about whether it was right or wrong, good or bad. Or the feedback is so delayed that they can't connect it to what they actually did. Fast learners are obsessive about feedback. They structure their practice so they know immediately whether they are doing it right. And not just good job or needs work, specific feedback. What exactly was right? What exactly needs to change? The faster and more specific your feedback, the faster you learn. Because you can adjust immediately, while the action is still fresh in your mind and body. Immediate feedback accelerates learning. Let's dig deeper into timing. There's a world of difference between feedback that comes instantly and feedback that arrives hours or days later. When feedback is immediate, your brain can directly connect cause and effect. You did this, and that happened. The link is clear. But when feedback is delayed, that connection weakens. You're not entirely sure which part of what you did led to the result. This is why video games are so effective at teaching their mechanics. The feedback is instant and constant. You press a button, something happens on screen immediately. You learn the system incredibly fast. So when you're designing your practice, ask yourself, how can I make the feedback loop as tight as possible? How can I know right away if I'm doing this correctly? The tighter the feedback loop, the faster you improve. Record and review yourself. Here's a simple technique that's almost magical in its effectiveness. Record yourself practicing. Video if it's a physical skill. Audio if it's speaking or music. Even just notes if it's writing or problem solving. Then review it with a critical eye. When you're in the moment of doing something, you can't see yourself clearly. You're too busy executing. But when you review a recording, you become your own observer. You notice things you had no idea you were doing. That habit you weren't aware of. That mistake you keep making without realizing it. That thing you thought you were doing but actually aren't. The recording doesn't lie. It shows you reality. And once you see reality clearly, you can change it. This technique is uncomfortable. Nobody likes watching or hearing themselves. But that discomfort is the price of rapid improvement. Use contrast examples, comparing good versus bad. Your brain learns powerfully from comparison. Show someone a good example of something, and they learn a bit. Show them a bad example, and they learn a bit. But show them both side by side, and suddenly the learning clicks at a deeper level. The contrast illuminates what matters. When you see a well-written paragraph next to a poorly written one, you understand what makes writing work in a way that studying good examples alone never teaches. When you watch someone perform a skill correctly and incorrectly, the key differences become obvious. So actively seek out contrast examples. Find the good and the bad. Study them together. Ask yourself, what's different? Why does this one work and that one doesn't? The answers you discover through contrast stick in ways that abstract rules never do. Create personal error libraries. Here's a practice that might seem strange at first. Keep a record of your mistakes. Not to dwell on them or beat yourself up, but to learn from them systematically. When you make an error, write it down. What was the mistake? What led to it? What's the correct way? Over time, you build a library of your personal weak points. And here's what happens. You start to see patterns. Oh, I always make this type of mistake when I'm tired. I consistently struggle with this particular kind of problem. Once you see the patterns, you can target them specifically. You can set up your practice to address your actual recurring problems, not just generic exercises. Your error library becomes a personalized curriculum, focused precisely on what you need to improve. Occasionally practice under pressure. There's practice in comfortable conditions, where you can take your time, where mistakes don't matter, where you can start over whenever you want. This kind of practice is essential. But it's not sufficient. Because the real world doesn't give you perfect conditions. So periodically, you need to practice under pressure. Set a timer and force yourself to perform within it. Practice in front of someone. Create stakes, even artificial ones. Put yourself in situations where you're slightly nervous, where you can't stop and restart. This does two things. First, it reveals what you've truly mastered versus what you can only do in perfect conditions. Second, it trains you to perform when it matters. Skills practiced only in comfort often crumble under pressure. But skills tested regularly under pressure become robust, reliable, available to you even when stakes are high and conditions aren't perfect. Real-world use makes skills stick. Here's something fascinating. You can practice a skill extensively in controlled conditions, and it feels like you've learned it. But then you try to use it in the real world, and suddenly it's different. More complicated. More variables. More uncertainty. The rubber meets the road when you use skills for real purposes, not just practice purposes. A language learned only in a classroom is different from a language used in actual conversations with native speakers. Code written only for exercises is different from code written to solve real problems. Real-world use forces you to integrate everything you've learned. It reveals gaps that practice never showed you. And it cements the learning in a way that pure practice, no matter how deliberate, cannot match. So don't wait until you've mastered something to use it for real. Start using it, even imperfectly, as soon as you can. Pair skills with real projects. This takes the previous insight and makes it actionable. Instead of practicing a skill in isolation, attach it to a real project that matters to you. Learning photography. Don't just do technical exercises. Commit to photographing your friend's wedding or documenting your neighborhood. Learning to code. Don't just complete tutorials. Build something you actually want to exist. The project gives context. It gives motivation. It forces you to encounter real problems, not just textbook problems. And when you finish, you have something tangible. Not just practice hours logged, but something created. Something real. Projects transform abstract skills into concrete capabilities. They are messy and challenging, but that's precisely why they are so effective at cementing your learning. Build skills through small projects. Now, you might be thinking, but I'm not ready for a real project yet. I need to practice more first. Here's the secret. Make the projects small. Appropriately small for your current level. Learning to write. Don't start with a novel. Write a short blog post. Learning to draw. Don't attempt a masterpiece. Draw something simple but complete. Learning to build websites. Don't create the next social media platform. Build a single-page site about something you care about. Small projects are real enough to teach you, but manageable enough not to overwhelm you. And as you complete small projects, you build confidence and capability. Then the projects can grow. Each one teaches you something the last one didn't. And you're building a portfolio of real work, not just a log of practice hours. And with that, we've completed our exploration of feedback, reality, and pressure. These aren't comfortable topics. They push you out of the safety of pure practice into the messier realm of actual performance. But this is where transformation happens. Where skills stop being theoretical and become truly yours. Where learning accelerates because you're not just practicing, you're doing. Let these principles guide you toward reality. Let them give you the courage to test yourself, to get feedback, to put your developing skills into the real world before you feel completely ready. Because that's where the magic happens. Segment 6. Memory, retention, and forgetting less. We've talked about how to practice effectively, how to get feedback, how to engage with reality. But there's a frustrating pattern many learners experience. You practice something. You get good at it. And then, a week later, a month later, it's gone. You have to relearn it all over again. It feels like pouring water into a leaky bucket. So let's talk about retention. About making what you learn actually stick. About why some people seem to remember everything while others are trapped in an endless cycle of learning and forgetting and relearning. Space practice over days. Here's one of the most robust findings in all of learning science, and yet it's one of the most ignored. The way you distribute your practice over time matters enormously. Imagine you have 5 hours to dedicate to learning something. You could practice for 5 hours straight in one day. Or you could practice 1 hour a day for 5 days. Which is better? Everything in our culture pushes us toward the first option. The marathon session. The cramming. But the research is unambiguous. Spaced practice wins every time. When you space your practice over multiple days, you give your brain time to consolidate what you've learned between sessions. You return to the material after you've started to forget it, and that re-engagement strengthens the memory far more than continuous practice ever could. It feels less efficient in the moment, but over time, spaced practice produces learning that lasts. Reviewing at the right time prevents forgetting. There's a specific pattern to how we forget things. Right after you learn something, you remember it clearly. Then, over hours and days, the memory fades. Eventually, if you don't revisit it, it's gone completely. But here's the key. If you review the information just before you're about to forget it, you dramatically strengthen that memory. And the next time, it takes longer before you start to forget again. Each well-timed review pushes the forgetting curve further out. This is called spaced repetition, and it's extraordinarily powerful. The trick is timing your reviews correctly. Too soon, and you're not getting the benefit. Too late, and you've already forgotten and you're starting from scratch. But hit that sweet spot, right as the memory is fading but still accessible, and you build retention that can last years. Use technology to automate repetition. Now, calculating the optimal review time for everything you're learning would be impossible to do manually. You'd need to track hundreds of items, each with its own forgetting curve. But this is exactly what technology can do for you. Apps like Anki or Quizlet use spaced repetition algorithms. You enter what you want to remember, and the software figures out when to show it to you again. Items you're forgetting get shown more frequently. Items you know well get spaced out over longer intervals. It's like having a personal memory trainer that knows exactly when you need to review each piece of information. For certain types of learning, especially facts, vocabulary, formulas, concepts, this approach is almost unfairly effective. Let technology handle the scheduling so your brain can focus on the actual learning. Learn in short, repeated bursts. This connects everything we've discussed about spacing and repetition into a practical approach. Instead of long, exhausting study sessions, embrace short bursts. 15 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, 10 minutes during lunch. These short sessions, repeated consistently over days and weeks, produce better retention than marathon cramming sessions. Why? Because each session creates a new memory consolidation cycle. Each time you stop and return later, you're strengthening the neural pathways. And shorter sessions keep you fresh. You're more likely to practice deliberately when you're only committing to 15 minutes than when you're facing a 2-hour grind. Consistency beats intensity when it comes to retention. Small, regular doses over time build memories that last. Use incremental learning. Here's a technique that sounds almost too simple to work, but it's remarkably effective. When you're learning something complex, don't try to master the whole thing before moving on. Instead, learn a little bit, then come back to it later and learn a little more. Then come back again. Each time you return, you review what you learned before and add something new. Your understanding grows incrementally, layer by layer. This might feel slower than trying to learn everything at once, but it's actually much faster because you're not forgetting and relearning. Each layer of understanding supports the next one. And because you're constantly reviewing the earlier material as you add new material, retention happens naturally. You're not memorizing and then forgetting. You're building a structure that grows stronger and more integrated over time. Combine imagination with practice. Here's something interesting about memory. Your brain doesn't make a huge distinction between things you actually did and things you vividly imagined doing. This might sound strange, but it's been proven in study after study. Athletes use this all the time. They mentally rehearse their performance, visualizing each movement in detail. And this mental practice actually improves their physical performance. You can use this too. When you're learning a skill, don't just practice physically. Practice mentally. Close your eyes and imagine yourself performing the skill perfectly. Feel what it would feel like. See what you would see. Hear what you would hear. This mental practice strengthens the same neural pathways that physical practice does. It's not a replacement for real practice, but it's a powerful supplement. And you can do it anywhere, anytime, even when you don't have access to your actual practice environment. Speaking out loud improves memory. There's something almost magical about saying things out loud. When you're learning something, when you're trying to remember something, speak it. Don't just read it silently or think it internally. Actually use your voice. What happens when you speak? You're engaging more of your brain. You're processing the information verbally. You're hearing it with your ears. You're feeling your mouth and throat form the words. All of these sensory inputs create additional memory traces. It's called the production effect, and the research shows it's a powerful memory enhancer. This is why teaching something to someone else is such an effective learning tool. You have to speak it, organize it, explain it out loud. Even if you're alone, talk through what you're learning. Explain it to an imaginary student. The act of speaking crystallizes your understanding and strengthens your memory. Engage multiple senses. Your brain has different systems for processing different types of sensory information. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, spatial. When you learn something using only one sense, you're storing it in one system. But when you engage multiple senses, you create multiple memory traces. You're storing the information in multiple places, connected in multiple ways. Learning a language. Don't just read words. Say them out loud. Write them by hand. Listen to them being spoken. Associate them with images. The more senses you involve, the richer the memory becomes. And when it comes time to recall, you have multiple pathways to access that memory. If one pathway is blocked, another is available. This redundancy makes your memory more robust and less likely to fail you when you need it. Multisensory input accelerates encoding. Encoding is the process of getting information from your immediate experience into long-term memory. And here's the key insight. Multisensory encoding is dramatically faster and stronger than single-sense encoding. When you see something and hear something and touch something all at the same time, your brain treats it as important. It pays more attention. It forms stronger connections. This is why hands-on learning is so effective. Why demonstrations that you can see and hear beat reading alone. Why physically doing something while learning about it cements the learning so powerfully. So whenever possible, don't learn through just one channel. Read and listen. Watch and practice. Engage as many senses as you reasonably can. Your brain will encode the information more deeply, more quickly, and more durably than any single-sense approach could achieve. And there we have our insights into memory and retention complete. 9 principles that explain why some people remember what they learn while others are trapped in endless cycles of forgetting and relearning. These aren't tricks or hacks. They are aligned with how your memory actually works. Use them wisely, use them consistently, and you'll find that what you learn actually stays with you. That the time you invest in learning compounds into genuine, lasting capability. Let these principles guide your practice. Let them transform your relationship with memory from frustration to confidence. Segment 7. Focus, energy, and environment. We've covered technique. We've covered memory. But there's something that can undermine all of that in an instant. Something so fundamental that without it, nothing else matters. Focus. You can have the perfect practice method, the ideal spacing schedule, the best feedback systems in the world. But if you can't focus, if your attention is scattered, if your energy is depleted, learning speed collapses. So let's talk about the conditions that make deep learning possible. Protect focus and energy. Here's what most people don't realize. Focus isn't unlimited. Energy isn't constant throughout the day. You have a finite amount of high-quality attention available to you, and once it's spent, it's gone until you rest and restore it. This means your focus and energy are precious resources that need to be protected deliberately. Just like you wouldn't leave money lying around carelessly, you shouldn't spend your best focus on trivial tasks. Email, social media, mindless browsing. These things consume attention, sometimes without you even noticing. Fast learners are ruthless about protecting their focus. They guard their peak energy hours. They say no to distractions. They create boundaries. Not because they are antisocial or rigid, but because they understand that focus is the raw material of learning. Without it, nothing else works. Remove hidden multitasking. You might think you're focused. You sit down to practice or study. But your phone is nearby. Your email is open in another tab. The TV is on in the background, just for ambient noise. You think these things aren't affecting you because you're not actively paying attention to them. But here's what the research shows. Your brain is paying attention, even when you're not consciously aware of it. That notification sound pulls a tiny bit of attention away. That open tab creates a small cognitive load as your brain tracks it. These are called attention residue, and they add up. True focus requires removing these hidden multitaskers. Put the phone in another room. Close all unnecessary tabs and applications. Turn off the TV. Create an environment where there's nothing competing for your attention, even subtly. The difference in your focus quality will be immediately noticeable. Learn at your best time. Your brain doesn't function at the same level all day long. There are times when you're sharp, alert, capable of deep focus. And there are times when you're foggy, tired, running on fumes. These patterns are partly biological, partly habitual. Some people are sharp in the morning. Others come alive in the evening. And throughout the day, everyone experiences natural energy peaks and valleys. Pay attention to your patterns. When do you feel most alert? When does focus come easily? That's when you should schedule your most demanding learning. Don't waste your peak hours on easy tasks. Don't try to learn difficult material when you're exhausted. Match your most important learning to your best time, and you'll accomplish in one focused hour what might take 3 hours at a suboptimal time. Matching tasks to arousal level matters. Here's something nuanced but important. Different tasks require different mental states. Some tasks benefit from high energy, high arousal, physical practice, creative brainstorming, energetic repetition. But other tasks need a calmer state. Careful analysis, detailed focus, precise execution. If you're too amped up, you make careless mistakes. If you're too calm, you lack the drive to push through difficult practice. So pay attention to your arousal level, your energy state, and match it to appropriate tasks. Feeling energized. That's great for active practice, for learning that involves movement or intensity. Feeling calm and focused. Perfect for detailed study, for careful analysis. Don't fight your current state. Use it strategically by choosing tasks that fit. Work in a dedicated focus zone. Your environment shapes your behavior more than you realize. When you practice or study in the same place where you also watch TV, scroll social media, eat meals, and relax, your brain doesn't know what mode to be in. The environment is associated with too many different activities. But when you have a dedicated space, even if it's just a specific chair or corner of a room, that's only used for focused learning, something powerful happens. Your brain starts to associate that space with focus. When you sit there, your mind shifts into learning mode automatically. It's like how you feel different in a library versus a coffee shop versus your bedroom. Each space carries associations. Create a focus zone for yourself, and your brain will help you focus simply by being there. Use sound strategically, or embrace silence. Some people learn best in complete silence. Others find that certain sounds actually help them focus. There's no universal rule here, only what works for you. But be strategic about it. If you're going to use music or ambient sound, choose it deliberately. Music with lyrics often competes for linguistic processing in your brain, which can interfere with learning that involves language or reading. Instrumental music or nature sounds might work better. Some people swear by white noise or brown noise to mask distracting environmental sounds. Others find any sound at all pulls their attention away. Experiment. Pay attention to what actually helps your focus, not what you think should help. And be willing to change your approach based on the task. What helps with physical practice might be different from what helps with studying concepts. Change your environment periodically. Here's an interesting finding. While having a dedicated focus zone is valuable, there's also benefit in occasionally changing where you learn. When you learn something in multiple different environments, your brain encodes it more flexibly. The memory becomes less tied to one specific context and more generally available. If you always practice in the exact same place, sometimes the skill becomes subtly dependent on that environment. But if you practice in a few different locations, the skill becomes more portable. So balance consistency with variation. Have your main focus zone, but occasionally practice elsewhere. Learn in different rooms, different settings. This makes your skills and knowledge more robust, more accessible regardless of where you need to use them. Reduce cognitive clutter with do-later lists. Here's a common focus killer. You sit down to learn, and your mind immediately fills with other things you need to do. Did I respond to that email? I should call my friend back. I need to pick up groceries. What was that thing I was supposed to remember? Each of these thoughts pulls attention away from what you're trying to focus on. Your brain is trying to make sure you don't forget important things, but in doing so, it's preventing you from focusing on anything. The solution is simple but effective. Keep a piece of paper nearby labeled "Do Later." When one of these thoughts pops up, write it down immediately. You're not going to do it now. You're just capturing it so your brain knows it won't be forgotten. This simple act frees your mind. The thought is captured. You can let it go, and your attention returns to your learning. It's remarkable how much this small practice can improve focus quality. Practice boredom tolerance. Here's an uncomfortable truth about modern life. We've become conditioned to constant stimulation. The moment we feel even slightly bored or unstimulated, we reach for our phones, check social media, find something, anything, to occupy our attention. But deep learning requires the ability to stay with something even when it's not immediately entertaining or stimulating. To sit with difficulty. To tolerate the discomfort of not understanding something yet. To push through the tedious parts. This is boredom tolerance, and it's a skill that needs to be practiced. Start small. Sit quietly for 2 minutes without any stimulation. Gradually extend it. Practice staying with a challenging task even when part of you wants to escape to something easier. This isn't about suffering. It's about building the capacity to maintain focus on what matters, even when it's not constantly entertaining. In a world of infinite distraction, boredom tolerance is a superpower. And there we have it. 9 principles about focus, energy, and environment. These might seem less directly about learning than our earlier sections, but make no mistake, they are absolutely foundational. All the technique in the world means nothing if you can't focus long enough to apply it. All the perfect practice methods fail if your environment constantly pulls you away. These principles create the conditions where deep learning becomes possible, where your brain can actually do the work of transformation. Protect these conditions. Value them. Create them deliberately. They are the invisible infrastructure that makes everything else work. Segment 8. Recovery, Sleep, and Brain Chemistry. We've talked about practice, about focus, about memory and environment. But here's where most people's understanding of learning stops short. They think learning happens only during practice, that the work is done when you close the book or put down the instrument. But fast learners know something different. They know that some of the most important learning happens when you're not practicing at all. It happens during rest, during sleep, during the quiet moments when your conscious mind isn't even thinking about what you're learning. Let's explore this hidden dimension of learning. Sleep locks in new skills. While you sleep, your brain is anything but idle. It's busy doing something remarkable, taking all the experiences and practice from your day and consolidating them into long-term memory, replaying the neural patterns, strengthening the connections that matter, pruning away the ones that don't. This process is so important that research shows you literally cannot learn effectively without adequate sleep. People who practice a skill and then sleep perform dramatically better the next day than people who practice the same amount but don't sleep. It's not just about being rested and alert. Sleep itself is when the learning solidifies, when temporary changes become permanent improvements. So if you're serious about learning fast, you must be serious about sleep. It's not a luxury. It's not wasted time. It's when your brain does the essential work of making your practice permanent. Short screen-free breaks consolidate learning. But you don't have to wait until night to give your brain consolidation time. Even short breaks during your practice or study sessions allow for mini-consolidation. Here's what's important though. The break needs to be genuinely restful for your brain. Scrolling through your phone isn't a break. Watching videos isn't a break. These activities still engage your attention, still demand processing. A real break means stepping away from screens entirely, looking out a window, closing your eyes, taking a short walk, letting your mind wander. During these moments, something called spontaneous replay happens. Your brain literally replays what you just practiced or studied, but faster, consolidating it without your conscious involvement. 5 to 10 minutes of this kind of rest between focused learning sessions can dramatically improve retention and integration. Use diffuse mode after focus. Your brain operates in two distinct modes. There's focused mode, where you're actively concentrating, deliberately working on something, paying direct attention. This is essential for learning. But there's also diffuse mode, a more relaxed, wandering state where your mind makes broader connections, sees bigger patterns, has insights that focused thinking misses. The magic happens when you alternate between these modes. You focus intensely on learning something. Then you step away and let your mind diffuse. Take a shower. Go for a walk. Do something routine that doesn't require much thought. And often, that's when understanding clicks. When solutions appear. When things that seemed confusing suddenly make sense. You can't force diffuse mode, but you can create space for it by intentionally stepping away from focused work and letting your mind roam freely for a while. Light exercise boosts plasticity. Here's something that might surprise you. Physical movement, even gentle exercise, changes your brain chemistry in ways that make learning easier. When you move your body, your brain releases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Think of it as fertilizer for your neurons. It makes your brain more plastic, more capable of forming new connections, more ready to learn. You don't need intense workouts for this benefit. Even a 20-minute walk can do it. Some people find that light exercise before a practice session primes their brain for learning. Others prefer exercising between study sessions to refresh their mental state. The key is that movement and learning are partners, not competitors for your time. They support each other. Your body and your brain are not separate systems. When you care for one, you enhance the other. Use nature exposure. There's something about being in nature, or even just looking at nature, that restores mental energy in a unique way. Research shows that spending time in natural environments, or even just looking at images of nature, reduces mental fatigue and improves subsequent focus and learning. It's called attention restoration theory. Urban environments, screens, and built spaces demand your attention constantly. Your brain has to filter out noise, process visual complexity, stay alert to potential stimuli. It's exhausting, even when you don't realize it. But nature is different. It holds your attention gently, without demanding active focus. Trees, water, sky, greenery, they allow your attention mechanisms to rest and restore. Even a few minutes looking at nature between study sessions can refresh your capacity for focus. If you can actually be in nature, even better. But even a view out a window to trees or a park provides measurable benefits. Support focus with diet and hydration. Your brain is a physical organ, and it runs on chemistry. When you're dehydrated, even mildly, your cognitive performance drops. Your focus weakens. Your memory suffers. Something as simple as drinking enough water throughout the day makes learning easier. And what you eat matters too. Your brain runs primarily on glucose, but the source of that glucose makes a difference. Foods that cause rapid blood sugar spikes and crashes create corresponding swings in mental energy. But foods that provide steady energy, complex carbohydrates, proteins, healthy fats, they support sustained focus. You don't need a perfect diet to learn effectively, but you also can't ignore the basics. Being chronically dehydrated or running on empty or riding a blood sugar roller coaster, these things make learning harder than it needs to be. Simple attention to hydration and reasonably stable energy from food removes unnecessary obstacles. Moderate stress can sharpen learning. Now, we often hear that stress is bad for learning, that you need to be completely relaxed and comfortable. But the reality is more nuanced than that. Too much stress, chronic stress, overwhelming stress, yes, that's harmful. It floods your system with cortisol, impairs memory formation, makes focus nearly impossible. But moderate stress, the kind that comes from a meaningful challenge, from slight pressure, from caring about doing well, that kind of stress actually enhances learning. It increases alertness. It focuses attention. It makes experiences more memorable. This is why learning with some stakes, some challenge, some pressure often produces better results than learning in completely comfortable, zero-stakes conditions. The key is finding the right level. Enough challenge to engage you fully, but not so much that you're overwhelmed. Enough pressure to focus you, but not so much that you panic. That sweet spot of moderate, meaningful stress is where optimal learning happens. And there we are. 7 insights into recovery, sleep, and the brain chemistry of learning. These are the aspects of learning that happen in the background, in the spaces between your active practice. Most people ignore these factors entirely, wondering why their learning feels harder than it should. But fast learners understand that learning is a whole body, whole life process. That what you do when you're not practicing matters just as much as what you do when you are. That your brain needs rest, movement, nature, fuel, and the right chemical environment to do its best work. Honor these needs. Build them into your learning practice. And you'll find that learning becomes not just faster, but more sustainable, more enjoyable, more integrated into your life as a whole. Segment 9. Consistency, habits, and automation. We've explored the techniques of learning, the conditions that support it, the biology that enables it. But here's a question that matters more than almost anything else. How do you actually show up consistently? How do you maintain practice not just for a week when motivation is high, but for months, for years? Because here's the truth, speed over a single day means nothing. Real learning speed is measured over months. And that requires something deeper than motivation. It requires systems, habits, automation. Let's talk about how to make learning inevitable rather than optional. Use trigger action plans. Your brain loves specific cues. When this happens, I do that. These are called implementation intentions or trigger action plans, and they are remarkably effective at turning intentions into actions. Instead of saying I'll practice guitar this week, you say after I pour my morning coffee, I'll practice guitar for 15 minutes. The trigger is specific. The action is specific. And your brain can now automate the connection. When the trigger occurs, the action follows almost without thinking. This bypasses the decision-making process entirely. You're not relying on willpower or motivation. You're riding on the momentum of a specific cue. The key is choosing triggers that happen reliably every day. After breakfast, before dinner, when you get home from work. Attach your learning to these existing moments, and it becomes automatic rather than something you have to constantly decide to do. Chain new skills to existing habits. You already have dozens of habits you do every day without thinking. You brush your teeth. You make coffee. You check your email. These habits are grooved into your routine so deeply that they require almost no effort or thought. So use them. Instead of trying to build a completely new practice routine from scratch, attach your learning to something you already do consistently. Right after you brush your teeth in the morning, review 5 vocabulary flashcards. Immediately before you check social media in the evening, do 10 minutes of practice. The existing habit becomes the trigger. And because the existing habit is already automatic, your new learning practice gets pulled along with it. You're not building from zero. You're grafting onto an established pattern. This technique, called habit stacking, makes consistency dramatically easier. Reduce friction to increase total practice. Here's a simple but powerful insight. Every bit of effort required to start practicing is friction. And friction determines whether you practice or not. If you have to dig your practice materials out of a closet, set everything up, find your notes, remember where you left off, that's a lot of friction. On a day when motivation is low, that friction will stop you. But if everything is already set out, ready to go, requiring only that you sit down and begin, the friction is minimal. And minimal friction means you'll practice even on days when you don't feel like it. So deliberately design for low friction. Leave your instrument out on a stand, not in a case. Keep your study materials on your desk, open to where you left off. Have your practice space ready to use at any moment. Every bit of setup you eliminate is resistance you've removed from your own path. Use pre-commitment to lock sessions. Your future self is unreliable. You might feel motivated now, planning to practice every day this week. But future you, tired after a long day, will find reasons not to. So don't leave it up to future you to decide. Decide now, and lock it in. Put practice sessions on your calendar as non-negotiable appointments. Tell someone you'll practice with them or report your progress to them. Sign up for a class that meets at a specific time. These pre-commitments remove the decision from the moment. It's already decided. You're just following through. This might sound like you're restricting your freedom, but actually, it's liberation. You're freed from the constant internal negotiation about whether to practice or not. The decision is made. All that remains is execution. Reduce decision fatigue inside practice. Every decision you make during practice consumes mental energy. What should I work on? How long should I do this? Should I move to the next thing? These micro-decisions add up, creating fatigue that has nothing to do with the actual learning. So remove them. Decide before your practice session exactly what you'll do and for how long. Create a practice routine that you follow every time. First this, then that, then this other thing. The routine becomes automatic. You're not constantly deciding. You're just following the plan. This might sound rigid, but it's actually freeing. Your mental energy goes entirely into the practice itself, not into managing the practice. And you'll find you can practice longer and more effectively when you're not constantly making decisions about what to do next. Use structured time blocking. Time is finite, and without structure, it disappears into the urgent demands of the day. Learning gets pushed to whenever I have time, which often means never. But when you block specific time for learning, when you protect that time as sacred, suddenly learning happens consistently. It doesn't have to be the same time every day, though that helps. But it does need to be blocked, scheduled, protected. Treat your learning time like you'd treat an important meeting. You wouldn't skip a meeting just because you didn't feel like it. Give your learning the same respect. Block the time. Honor it. And watch how consistency emerges not from superhuman willpower, but from simple structure. Keep a simple learning journal. Here's a practice that serves multiple purposes at once. At the end of each practice session, take 2 minutes to write down what you did and what you noticed. Not a lengthy reflection, just a few sentences. What did I practice? What went well? What was challenging? What do I want to focus on next time? This simple act does several things. It creates accountability. It helps you notice patterns over time. It makes progress visible, which motivation needs. It also helps you process what you learned, which aids retention. And it removes the question of where to start next time. You just read your last entry. A learning journal doesn't need to be elaborate or time-consuming. Simple consistency is what matters. Just a few sentences after each session, building a record of your learning journey over time. And there we have 7 principles of consistency, habits, and automation. These might seem less exciting than techniques for faster learning. But here's the reality. The fastest learning technique in the world means nothing if you don't use it consistently. Technique determines what happens in a single session. But consistency determines what happens over months and years. And that's where real transformation lives. Not in the intensity of a single day, but in the steady accumulation of many days. These principles remove the burden of constant motivation and willpower. They build systems that carry you forward even when you don't feel inspired. They make learning not something you have to force yourself to do, but something that happens naturally, inevitably, as part of the structure of your life. Build these systems. Trust them. Let them carry you forward. Segment 10. Social, Teaching, and Mastery. We've built a comprehensive understanding of how learning works. The practice methods, the memory techniques, the environmental conditions, the habits and systems. But there's one final layer we need to explore. One that might be the most powerful of all. Learning doesn't happen in isolation. Other people, social connection, teaching, and being taught. These aren't just nice additions to learning. They are accelerants. They unlock a dimension of learning that solo practice simply cannot reach. So let's explore this final acceleration layer. Learn by teaching others. There's an old saying, if you want to master something, teach it. And research consistently bears this out. When you prepare to teach something to someone else, your brain processes that information differently. You can't just have a vague sense of understanding. You need to organize it clearly. Anticipate questions. Find ways to explain it simply. This process of preparing to teach forces you to engage with the material at a deeper level than simply studying for yourself ever could. And then, when you actually teach, when you explain out loud, answer questions, see where someone else gets confused, your understanding deepens even further. You discover gaps you didn't know you had. You find new ways to think about concepts. Teaching transforms your understanding from passive reception to active mastery. So don't wait until you're an expert to teach. Teach what you're learning to anyone who will listen, and watch how quickly your understanding solidifies. Peer tutoring deepens understanding. This works in both directions. When you tutor someone else, you learn deeply for all the reasons we just discussed. But here's what's interesting. Being tutored by a peer, someone who's just slightly ahead of you rather than a distant expert, can be incredibly effective too. A peer tutor remembers what it was like to not understand. They know where the confusing parts are because they struggled with them recently. They explain things in language that's accessible rather than expert terminology. And there's less intimidation, less fear of looking foolish asking questions. Both people benefit. The tutor deepens their mastery through teaching. The student gets explanation tailored to their level of understanding. If you can find a learning partner where you trade tutoring each other, even in the same subject, you've created a powerful learning engine. Social motivation enhances encoding. When you're learning alone, it's easy to let things slide. To skip the hard parts. To give partial effort. But when you're learning with others, when someone else sees your work, when you're accountable to another person, something shifts. You try harder. You pay more attention. You're more present. This isn't about competition, though healthy competition can help. It's about presence and accountability. Your brain encodes information more strongly when there's social context. When you're going to discuss what you learned with someone. When you've committed to showing your progress. When someone else is counting on you. This social dimension creates a layer of motivation that pure self-discipline struggles to match. You don't have to learn in groups all the time. But periodic social connection around your learning, sharing progress, discussing challenges, this social element makes the learning stick in ways that pure solo practice often doesn't. Use small group or partner learning. Large classes have their place, but for active learning, smaller is usually better. 2 to 4 people is often ideal. Small enough that everyone participates. Large enough that you get multiple perspectives. In this size group, you can actually discuss ideas, not just listen to lectures. You can work through problems together, each person contributing. You can teach each other, question each other, challenge each other's understanding. The dynamic keeps you engaged in ways that solo study often doesn't. And you learn not just from the material, but from seeing how other people think about it, what questions they ask, what connections they make. If you're learning something independently, consider finding just 1 or 2 other people learning the same thing. Meet regularly, even briefly. Share what you're working on. The social structure will carry you through moments when solo motivation fails. Get targeted help instead of generic help. Here's a common pattern. You're stuck on something, so you ask for help. And you get generic advice. General principles. Broad strategies. But what you actually need is specific guidance on your specific problem. Fast learners are good at asking for targeted help. They don't just say, "I'm struggling with this topic." They say, "I understand this part and this part, but when I try to apply it to this specific situation, this specific thing doesn't make sense." The more specific your question, the more valuable the help you receive. And this specificity requires you to actually analyze where you're stuck, which itself is a learning process. Before asking for help, spend time figuring out exactly what you don't understand. What specifically is confusing? Where exactly does your understanding break down? Then ask for help with that precise point. You'll get much better answers, and you'll learn more from the process of formulating the question. Compare with your past self, not others. Here's a trap that derails countless learners. You see someone else who's better than you, more advanced, learning faster, and you feel discouraged. You start comparing, judging yourself, wondering if you're talented enough. This comparison with others is poison to learning, because there will always be someone ahead of you, always someone who seems to progress faster. But here's what matters. Are you better than you were last week? Last month? Last year? That's the only comparison that matters. You're not competing with anyone else. You're developing your own capabilities, on your own timeline, from your own starting point. Keep records of your progress. Look back at where you were when you started. Celebrate how far you've come. Use other people as inspiration, as proof of what's possible, but never as a stick to beat yourself with. Your journey is your own. Track progress with visible metrics. This connects to everything we've discussed about motivation and consistency. Progress is motivating, but progress in learning often feels invisible. You're working hard, practicing consistently, but it's hard to see the improvement day to day. So make it visible. Track something measurable. Maybe it's how many words you know in a new language. How long you can practice before making a mistake. How fast you can complete a certain task. What matters is that it's measurable and you track it over time. Create a simple chart or log. Watch the numbers improve. This visible progress serves multiple purposes. It shows you that your effort is working, which maintains motivation. It helps you notice plateaus early, so you can adjust your approach. And it creates a sense of momentum, a feeling that you're genuinely moving forward. Numbers don't capture everything about learning, but they capture something. And that something can be the difference between giving up and pushing through. And there we have it. 7 insights into the social dimension of learning and the path toward mastery. These principles take everything we've learned and add the power of human connection, of teaching and being taught, of shared motivation and mutual support, of seeing your progress clearly and comparing yourself only with who you were, not with who others are. Learning can be solitary, and there's value in that. But learning amplified by social connection, by teaching, by visible progress and healthy perspective, that's learning that not only goes faster but feels better. That sustains itself through challenges. That transforms not just what you can do, but how you see yourself. These are the final pieces. The complete picture of how learning actually works and how to make it work optimally for you. Let all of these principles settle together. Let them form a complete understanding that you can draw on whenever you're learning anything new. Segment 11. Creativity, constraints, and longevity. We've covered how to learn effectively, how to build consistency, how to leverage social connection. But there's something that happens on the learning journey that can stop everything in its tracks. Burnout. Plateaus. The feeling that you're stuck, that progress has stopped, that the joy has drained away. Fast learners don't just learn quickly. They learn sustainably. They know how to keep improving over years, not just weeks. They understand how to navigate plateaus and prevent burnout. So let's explore these final principles that separate those who sustain growth from those who flame out. Use constraints to boost creativity. Here's something paradoxical. When you have unlimited options, creativity often freezes. Too many choices, too many possibilities, and you don't know where to start. But when you impose constraints, creativity flourishes. Write a story, but you can only use 100 words. Play a melody, but you can only use 3 notes. Solve this problem, but you can't use the most obvious method. Constraints force you to think differently, to find novel solutions, to explore territory you'd never visit if every option was available. When you're learning a skill and you feel stuck in a rut, try adding unusual constraints. They'll push you into creative territory. They'll reveal aspects of the skill you've been ignoring. Constraints aren't limitations. They are generators of possibility. Use constraints to force core technique. Constraints serve another purpose too. They strip away crutches and force you to rely on fundamentals. If you're learning to write and you always use elaborate vocabulary, try writing something using only simple words. You'll be forced to rely on structure and clarity instead. If you're learning a sport and you always use your dominant hand or foot, practice using only the other side. You'll develop balance and discover weaknesses you didn't know you had. Constraints reveal what's truly solid in your technique and what's just compensation for underlying gaps. They are diagnostic tools, and they are also training tools, forcing you to develop capabilities you might otherwise avoid. When progress feels stuck, strategically chosen constraints can break you out of patterns and force genuine improvement in areas you've been unconsciously neglecting. Separate input days and output days. Here's a pattern many learners fall into. Every practice session, they consume new information and try to produce something. Study a bit, practice a bit, over and over. But there's value in separating these modes more distinctly. Have days that are primarily about input. Reading, watching, listening, observing, gathering ideas and techniques and information. Then have days that are primarily about output. Creating, practicing, producing, applying what you've learned without consuming anything new. When you try to do both constantly, you never fully engage with either mode. Input mode needs space to absorb and process. Output mode needs space to integrate and apply without distraction. This doesn't mean rigid separation every single day, but periodically, dedicate whole sessions or even whole days to one mode or the other. You'll find both become more effective when they are not constantly competing for your attention. Periodically reset technique at slow speed. As you get better at something, you naturally speed up. And that's good. But here's what often happens. At higher speeds, small technical errors creep in. Bad habits form. Compensatory patterns develop. And you don't notice because you're moving too fast to pay attention to the details. So periodically, deliberately slow down. Way down. Return to basics at a speed where you can pay attention to every detail of your technique. This feels frustrating at first. You know you can go faster. But this slow reset serves a crucial purpose. It lets you clean up your technique before bad habits become too ingrained. It ensures your foundation stays solid even as you build speed. Think of it as maintenance. Regular tune-ups that keep everything running smoothly. Without these resets, technique gradually degrades, and eventually, you hit a plateau you can't break through. Use background conditions strategically. Not everything about learning requires your full attention. Some things can happen in the background while you're doing other activities. Listening to podcasts in the language you're learning while you're commuting. Playing music in the style you're trying to master while you're doing routine tasks. Surrounding yourself with examples of what you're trying to learn. This background exposure won't replace deliberate practice. It's not a shortcut, but it does something valuable. It keeps the skill in your awareness. It provides passive exposure that can support your active learning. It makes the patterns familiar so when you do practice deliberately, recognition comes faster. Use background time strategically, not as a replacement for focused practice, but as a supplement. A way to increase total exposure without requiring additional dedicated time. Train focus with concentration workouts. We've talked about the importance of focus throughout this entire journey. But here's something most people don't realize. Focus itself can be trained. Just like you can build physical stamina, you can build attentional stamina. Concentration workouts are simple. Choose a single object of focus. Maybe it's your breath. Maybe it's a single point you're looking at. Maybe it's a simple task like counting. Then sustain your attention on that one thing for a set period. When your mind wanders, and it will, gently bring it back. That's one rep. Start with just 5 minutes. It will be harder than you expect. Gradually extend the duration. 10 minutes. 15. 20. This practice isn't directly related to what you're learning, but it builds the underlying capacity for sustained attention. And that capacity transfers to everything. When you can focus deeply for longer periods without your attention fracturing, every learning session becomes more productive. Focus training increases learning capacity. This builds on the previous insight. When you strengthen your ability to focus, you're not just making existing practice more effective. You're actually expanding how much you can learn in a given time period. Think of focus as a container. A weak container can only hold so much learning before it overflows and spills out. A strong container can hold more. When you train focus systematically, you expand your capacity. You can practice deliberately for longer. You can sustain attention on complex material without mental fatigue setting in as quickly. You can push through difficulty without your attention escaping to easier things. This is fundamental capacity building. It's not a technique for learning any particular skill. It's an upgrade to the learning system itself. And the benefits compound across everything you learn, now and in the future. And there we have it. 7 principles for sustaining learning over the long term, for navigating plateaus, for keeping creativity alive, for preventing burnout. These aren't about learning faster in the next week. They are about learning faster over the next year, the next decade, the next lifetime. Because the fastest learners aren't necessarily the ones who sprint hardest. They are the ones who keep going, who know how to refresh their approach when things get stale, who understand that sustainable practice beats intense but short-lived effort, who build not just skills, but the capacity to keep building skills indefinitely. Let these principles guide your long-term journey. Let them help you navigate the inevitable plateaus and challenges. Let them keep your learning fresh and sustainable, not just for this skill, but for every skill you'll ever develop. Segment 12, Final Synthesis. We've journeyed through nearly 100 insights about learning, techniques and principles, biology and psychology, individual practice and social connection. But now, as we bring all of this together, let's step back and see the complete picture. Let's understand how all these pieces fit together into a coherent whole. Because fast learning isn't about memorizing tricks or hacks. It's about understanding a system and then building that system into your life. Align alertness, attention, and repetition. Here's the synthesis of so much we've discussed. Learning happens optimally when three things come together at once. Alertness, your brain's readiness to encode new information. Attention, your focused engagement with what you're learning. And repetition, the spaced practice that makes temporary changes permanent. When all three align, learning is effortless and fast. When even one is missing, learning becomes a struggle. So the master learner's task is simple in concept, challenging in execution. Create conditions where you're alert. Protect and direct your attention. Space your repetition intelligently. Get these three elements working together, and everything else becomes easier. Miss any one of them, and you're fighting uphill. Continuously adjust difficulty and plan. Learning is not a straight line. You don't just set a plan at the beginning and follow it robotically until the end. Fast learners are constantly adjusting. Is this too easy? Make it harder. Is this overwhelming? Break it down smaller. Am I plateauing? Change the approach. They pay attention to feedback, both from their performance and from their own internal experience. And they adjust dynamically. This requires honesty. The willingness to admit when something isn't working. The flexibility to change course even when you've invested time in a particular approach. Your initial plan is your best guess. But reality provides information your guess couldn't include. Be willing to adjust. Continuously. Based on what's actually happening, not what you hoped would happen. Turn knowledge into action immediately. Here's a trap that catches many learners. They consume information endlessly. Books, courses, videos, articles. They feel like they are learning because they are consuming. But consumption isn't learning. Application is learning. The moment you learn something new, find a way to use it. Immediately. Don't wait until you've learned more. Don't wait until you feel ready. Apply it now, even imperfectly. Write using the technique you just learned about. Speak the phrase you just studied. Try the movement you just watched. This immediate application does something crucial. It transforms passive knowledge into active capability. It reveals what you actually understood versus what you only thought you understood. And it creates momentum. Each small application builds confidence for the next one. Learning becomes a cycle of consume, apply, adjust, consume more, rather than endless consumption with application always postponed to someday. Learning in real conditions makes skills robust. We've touched on this before, but it's worth emphasizing again as we synthesize everything. Practice in perfect conditions produces fragile skills. They work only when conditions are perfect. But real life is messy, distracting, imperfect, stressful. So practice deliberately includes real conditions. Noise, time pressure, distractions, imperfect tools. This doesn't mean every practice session should be chaotic. But regularly, intentionally, practice in conditions that mirror reality. This builds robustness. Your skills become reliable not just in the practice room, but everywhere. In the situations where you'll actually need them. Where stakes are real and conditions aren't controlled. Robust skills that work in reality are worth infinitely more than impressive skills that only work in perfect isolation. Strong fundamentals reduce future effort. This is about playing the long game. You can rush through fundamentals, get to the advanced stuff quickly, and feel like you're progressing fast. But eventually, those weak fundamentals catch up with you. Everything becomes harder than it should be. You hit ceilings you can't break through. And eventually, you have to go back and relearn the basics properly. Or you can invest time up front in truly mastering fundamentals. It feels slower at first, less exciting, but then everything that comes after becomes easier, faster, more intuitive. Strong fundamentals are like compound interest. The investment you make early pays returns forever. Every advanced technique builds easily on a solid foundation. Without that foundation, every new skill is a struggle. Choose the path that seems slower at first but is actually faster in the long run. Motivation and recovery protect speed. Speed isn't just about optimizing practice technique. It's about sustainability. You can push hard for a week and burn out. Or you can find a pace you can maintain for months. Fast learners protect their motivation by keeping practice enjoyable, by celebrating progress, by connecting their learning to meaningful goals. And they protect their recovery by respecting rest, by getting adequate sleep, by not treating learning as a grind that requires constant suffering. When motivation and recovery are protected, you show up consistently. And consistency over time beats intensity in short bursts. The fastest learning happens when you can maintain good practice over long periods. Not when you practice perfectly for 3 days and then quit. Learning fast is built, not gifted. Let's return to where we started. The myth that some people are just naturally fast learners and others aren't. Now, having explored all these principles, you can see the truth. Fast learning is a set of skills, strategies, and systems. It's not magic. It's not genetics. It's not mysterious talent. Some people stumble into effective learning strategies early in life and seem naturally gifted. But there's nothing they are doing that you can't learn to do. Every technique we've discussed can be learned. Every principle can be applied. The capacity for fast learning is available to everyone willing to understand how learning works and then structure their practice accordingly. Efficient practice beats talent. Here's a liberating truth. Talent, to the extent it exists at all, matters far less than how you practice. Someone with modest natural ability who practices efficiently will surpass someone with great natural talent who practices poorly. Every time. Because efficient practice compounds. It builds on itself. It creates momentum. While talent, if not supported by good practice, stagnates. It might give you a head start, but it won't carry you far. So if you've ever worried that you're not talented enough, stop. That's the wrong question. The right question is, am I practicing efficiently? Am I using the principles that actually work? Because if you are, your progress is inevitable. Not instant, but inevitable. Small advantages compound. We've seen this principle appear in different forms throughout our journey. A slightly better practice method. A bit more focus. Marginally better sleep. Each advantage seems small in isolation. But they don't exist in isolation. They stack. They multiply. They compound over time. Someone who's 5% more efficient in their practice doesn't just learn 5% faster. Over months, that small edge compounds into massive differences in capability. This is encouraging because it means you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to optimize everything at once. Small improvements, consistently applied, create extraordinary results. Start with one principle from everything we've discussed. Apply it until it's natural. Then add another. Let the advantages accumulate. Fast learning is sustainable learning. This might be the most important synthesis of all. True speed in learning isn't about rushing. It's not about cramming or forcing or pushing yourself to exhaustion. Fast learning that lasts, that builds genuine capability, is sustainable learning. It's learning you can maintain not just for weeks, but for years. It respects your need for recovery. It maintains your motivation. It builds systematically rather than frantically. It integrates into your life rather than consuming it. When you see someone who's genuinely mastered multiple skills, who keeps learning and improving over decades, you're not seeing someone who learned to go faster in the short term. You're seeing someone who learned to sustain learning over the long term. And paradoxically, that's what produces the fastest results. Not in a day or a week, but over the arc of months and years and a lifetime. Anyone can learn faster with the right system. This is where everything comes together. All the principles, all the techniques, all the insights we've explored. They form a system. Not a rigid formula that everyone must follow identically, but a flexible framework you can adapt to your own learning, your own goals, your own life. You now understand how learning actually works, how memory consolidates, how attention functions, how practice should be structured, how to leverage social connection, how to build sustainable habits, how to navigate plateaus, how to protect your capacity over time. This knowledge transforms you from someone at the mercy of trial and error into someone who can deliberately optimize their learning process. The system is yours now. You can apply it to anything you want to learn, now or in the future. Fast learning isn't a gift some people have and others don't. It's a system. And anyone willing to understand and apply that system can learn faster than they ever thought possible. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through 100 facts about learning skills quickly. But really, this isn't an ending. It's a beginning. You now have a complete framework for understanding how learning works and how to make it work optimally for you. These aren't just facts to remember. They are tools to use, principles to apply, a system to build into your life. Some of these insights will resonate immediately. Others might not make sense until you experience them yourself. That's natural. You don't need to apply everything at once. Start where you are. Choose the principles that feel most relevant to your current learning challenges. Apply them. Notice what changes. Then add more. Let your understanding deepen through experience, not just through hearing these words. The path to learning faster is clear now. Not because it's easy, but because it's understood. Not because there are shortcuts, but because there are principles that work when applied consistently. You have everything you need. The question now is not whether you can learn faster. The question is, what will you choose to learn? What skills will you build? What capabilities will you develop? The system is yours. The journey is yours. And the potential is extraordinary. Rest well, knowing that you now understand not just what to learn, but how to learn. And that understanding will serve you for everything that comes next. Before I go, please like and subscribe so I can keep providing you with videos like this. See you all next time.